few minutes. Just wanted to say a few words obviously about the Dalai Lama himself, because I mean, I fortunately had the pleasure of meeting him a number of years ago, and I really must say it was a real pleasure meeting the Dalai Lama, and he's often referred to as Holiness. Personally, I would prefer to call, refer to him as his happiness, because he really does embody happiness. Every time you see his pictures or his video clips, you always see a great smile and a glow. And actually meeting him in person, you feel that even more so. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the story of how he was rescued. And let me hand it over to Tanu, who's going to introduce Rani Singh today.
Very warm welcome to our dear viewers. We are all in for a treat today as we talk to Rani Singh, the author of the book, An Officer and His Holiness. I would like to invite the viewers to put any questions they might have for Rani on the chat, and we will put forward to them, to her at the end of the chat. As you may all know Rani for her successful regular leading lights column as a special assignments editor in UK's oldest ethnic newspaper, The Asian Voice. Rani is a senior broadcast journalist working as an independent reporter, producer, mainly for the BBC. She also reports live in studio on breaking news stories for Al Jazeera English and had regular columns in Forbes. Her reporting for television, radio, print, and online has taken her all over South Asia and other parts of the world. She currently presents a 2-hour radio show on commercial radio, and recently was a producer on a 10-part series on the history of British jazz on Jazz FM. There is a lot more and so much more I could say about her, but to sum it all up, she's one of the best in the industry, and we feel very privileged to have her with us today. A very huge and warm welcome to you, Rani.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And would you, Rani, like to tell us more about your background? I've said a bit, but if you'd like to add, because there's so much more about your background that we'd love to hear.
Thank you very much, Tanu and Bhupinder. Thank you very much, Patwari clan, for having me. You know, it's the first time in since I started my career that I've really had the privilege of talking to my own extended family like this, and I'm really honored that Chanchal Chaudhary and Bhupinder chose to create this session. So I feel very privileged to be here and very much sort of loved and supported. I'm hoping that some of my own immediate family will be joining us from India as well, Jeeti and other cousins. I don't know if they're here yet, but please do identify that yourselves when you are. And Chanchal is directly related to me because Chanchal's late father was my paternal grandmother's first cousin. Chanchal, I think that's right, isn't it? I hope that's right anyway, but and I'm sure there are other relationships if they're identified to me that I have probably with most of the Patwari Bradri. So it's really lovely to have to be talking with such so many distinguished members of my family.
Oh, that's lovely, Rani. I think we'll start off the conversation now. Could you please share with our viewers what your book, for the people who don't know, what the book, An Officer and His Holiness, is about? Can you give us a gist?
Yes, Tanu, thanks very much for asking. Actually, I first wrote the story up in 1986 in one of the early Sikh children's storybooks in the UK, Stories from the Sikh World, just in about 3 or 4 pages. And the gist of the story, which I've since spoken about in the Indian press, particularly after it was published in early 2020, is that my maternal uncle, the late Padma Shri Har Mander Singh, had several interesting and high-profile, important postings in his career once he passed out from the army. And these were border posts, so they were sensitive areas. I won't say connected with intelligence, because that's not that's above my pay grade, and I'm not really supposed to go into that area. But they were very sensitive areas, obviously. And in 1959, Mamaji was political officer in what was then called NIFA, Northeast Frontier area, and that was where Arunachal Pradesh is now. In other words, the Eastern Himalayas bordering with Tibet, China, and India. Very, very primitive area, very remote, not visited much by mainland Indians, so to speak, and very difficult to get to. But he was there, he was posted to his headquarters, Bomdila, and it was while he was there that he got instructions from the Prime Minister's office via Shillong, which was his immediate headquarters, that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was apparently escaping from the Chinese, and it was Mamaji's responsibility to locate where His Holiness was going to come into India, if he was coming into India, where amongst the Eastern Himalayas he was going to come in, to locate him, to meet him, or have his team meet him, and then to conduct him to safety in mainland India. So it was a big assignment in treacherous and dangerous conditions with very, very poor communications, no internet or anything, just very poor wireless communications, meager resources. And that was the assignment, and that's what he did. I'd heard about it through the family for many, many years. But I thought the Dalai Lama was then in his 80s. My late uncle was in his 90s. And I thought if nobody else was going to tell the story, then it behoved me to do so. So that's what I did. And I wrote about that little written about in detail story, and that's what formed the book over about 5 or 6 years. Janchal, I don't know if he's here, but he also knew about the story, and I hope he's going to contribute later on and tell us what he knows.
Rani, you have answered a few of the things I was just going to ask you now, but I read in detail in your book how it all came about, how you thought of the book, how one thing led to another. I mean, as you've already mentioned your story in a children's book 30 years ago, 1986, to also what you had mentioned, your friend Brenda's intuition, then your investigation of the Tibetans in South Asia, and then to meeting His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Could you please take us through the process and the timeline from inspiration to conceptualizing and to the construction of the book?
Sure, Tanu. Actually, I wrote another book. I still don't classify myself as an author because I really like broadcasting. But in around 2010, 11, 12, I was commissioned to write a book about another Indian political leader and the first international biography of Sonia Gandhi. And so I thought, how can I write a book? I've never written anything longer than 1,000 words. So, and they had a very tight deadline because they said, we want to be first in the world to do this, a proper factual one. So having written that, my friend Brenda Elvin said to me, Rani, I think it would be a really good idea if you wrote the story of your uncle now and the Dalai Lama. It would be a good project to do. And something was guiding her, call it Waiguruji or God, or, some message sort of seemed to come to her that it was important for her to tell me to do this. So I said, okay. I didn't have a book publisher. I hadn't met the Dalai Lama, although lots of you have, and several members of my family had, clearly. But I thought, how on earth am I going to reach him? So I took it on. I tried to suggest to various publishers that this was a good idea and a good story to do. And eventually I met with Richard Branson's director of public relations. Actually, I was interviewing him for Forbes, and I'd written extensive letters to the Dalai Lama's office. I said, I'm Har Mander Singh's niece. I would like to have an interview to talk about his story. And so just gaining that interview was very, very difficult. Very difficult. And it took over a year. I tried through the London office of the Dalai Lama and various other parties. The representative who was there at the time was very helpful. Then he got transferred to Canada. Then everything came to a halt. So I started to rack my brain, and I thought, it's so important I get to speak to the Dalai Lama, as well as my uncle, who wasn't an easy interview to reach either. And eventually I had to ask my mother to persuade her one and only brother to talk to me, because he's very publicity shy. And I think being in army / sensitive areas, he didn't really want to talk too much. He didn't court publicity. But eventually he did agree. So then it was a question of getting His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in desperation, after a year, I spoke to one of my young friends who's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Sujit Nair, who was linked with other RSA fellows in India. One of them was Mike Knowles. These names may not mean anything to you, but they're important to the project, to the book project. And Mike Knowles mentioned it to another RSA fellow, Ashish Gunju, who's very famous in India as an architect. And he is the architect to the Dalai Lama's sister-in-law, who wanted to have a nunnery built in Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives now. So, and Ashish stays with her and her husband, Dalai Lama's youngest brother, when he's in Dharamsala. So he mentioned it to them, and straight away, Tenzin Chogyal, the Dalai Lama's youngest brother, went to the office of the Dalai Lama, arranged an interview, and it was done within 4 weeks. So then I was in a pickle, how am I going to get there? What's going to happen? And I mentioned it to Nick Fox when I went to talk to him about this article I was doing for Forbes. And Nick Fox said, I'll arrange a book for you. And so he spoke to the head of Virgin Books, and Virgin Books spoke to Virgin Books India, which is part of Random House India now. And then they commissioned a book, and that's what I went out with, knowing that I had this book commission. So then it was a question of interviewing and preparing for the interview, making sure I'd be allowed to ask all my questions, and then being able to sit down in front of His Holiness and my uncle separately, all in the space of 1 week.
Okay, that's like, I was just going to say, you obviously must have interviewed so many and to gather the information, but probably the most significant interviews would have been the two narratives of Har Mander Singh and Dalai Lama. You've just told us how you managed to get the interviews. Were there any other challenges also along the way? There would have been plenty. It's not an easy task that you have managed to do. So if you want to share those, and so you managed to get the interviews, and then you conducted the interviews with both of them, is it?
That's right. I did it, also, as I think, because I'm BBC trained, they tell you to go for those questions in those areas that the other writers and journalists haven't gone to. So even though it was a Dalai Lama and it was a big win, and he spoke to me for 45 minutes, and he went into detail about his story and the escape, I still wanted to go that extra mile. And I'd been given a tip off that he's very fond of his garden and flowers. So then I said in front of his private secretary, Your Holiness, I heard you're very fond of your garden. I'm here for another day or two. Could I come and interview you in your garden? And he said, oh, yes, I will be here. I'm very busy. I go in. I'll be going in on one day. So you can come. And so then his private secretary didn't have much choice, I suppose. And I understand that very, very few journalists have been invited into his garden. So again, that was all very, very last minute planning. And very, very high security. Probably out of all the leaders I've interviewed, the most high security is around the Dalai Lama. Understandably, and he has a lot of Tibetan security around him. They are really amazing. So there are many, many checks, even to the extent, if I'm allowed to say this, that they went into my handbag, obviously, and they pulled out the lipstick and they made me test it and prove to them that it wasn't.
Oh, really? Oh,
and
wow.
Same with the perfume.
Wow.
I've never been so thoroughly searched as I was with the Tibetan gods, very, very respectfully. And but I was quite impressed with them. Finally, I was admitted into the garden and I saw him coming down from his private quarters. The garden, it has a path up to the palace, what I call the palace, and is referred to as his palace, the official meeting rooms.
Yeah.
And so he descends his private quarters down a staircase with his monk aides. So leaning on them, then he comes down the staircase, he greets the Indian security guards at the bottom. Everybody's very, very respectful. They obviously know each other very well. And the Indian security are very respectful, namaste, satsakal, or whatever, Your Holiness. And he's very jovial. And then I went bounding up to him and he said, Har Mander's niece, I'm very fond of your uncle. And
you sound like him, Rani. You're doing well.
I've spent so much time interviewing him. His voice is in my head,
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel a kind of affection and bond with him, and he adored my uncle, and my late uncle, and he and so and the rest of my family. You could see that, definitely. And he walked me through his garden. He told me the flowers that he liked, and then he and the security guards were, behind us. And eventually he darted off the path at one point and he said, oh, I remember something. And he went to his, what was a sort of kind of greenhouse off the route. And the security guards were all sort of, where's he going now? And he went and picked and pointed to an orchid in a pot. And he said, and I thought, what's this all about? And he said, orchid. And apparently Nifa or Kaming division, or Arunachal as it now is very famous for its orchid varieties. And he said that at the time of coming to Nifa, he was given an orchid, and and so he's kept an orchid in a plant pot there to remind him of Mamaji and the time when he arrived in Bomdila, which was very personal to me.
Yeah.
And he, I took his hand, and he and I held hands because he needed some support because the path was uphill.
Yeah.
And he carried on talking to me as we went walking along. So that was another very special. That was a second interview with him formally, and it was very special. So that was a bit of a challenge. And also when I went, and I think also even interviewing Mamaji was a challenge, because I knew it was historically important. I probably thought that I would only get one chance to do this.
Yeah.
So that gives an added tension, because also Mamaji was very careful about his time. He wasn't 100% fit and well, though he was very alert mentally. And I knew that every moment I got with each of these two gentlemen was very, very precious.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, with what I'm hearing from you, I think you have been really blessed and fortunate
Yes.
in all this. And it seems like the universe has come together to support your efforts, starting with Brenda's intuition and then everything falling. I mean, obviously, you've made such a big effort, but then the universe has helped you with it. Rani, if we talk about the two most integral and central characters of the book, they would be the political officer in charge of the operation, Har Mander Singh, your Mamaji, and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And I'm sure the audience would like to know more about them. So starting with the Har Mander Singh, who was also your uncle, could you tell us more about him, about his personality, and especially about his diary and his folder that was marked secret? As you say in the book, these were quite instrumental in your research and for collecting accurate details. And we wouldn't be wrong to say that Har Mander Singh was the one man who, because of who the Dalai Lama is alive and safe today. I wouldn't be wrong to say that. So could you expand and tell us more about your Mamaji?
Yes, definitely. And he's relevant to this session because he was an ace Butwari. We are Butwaris. So that's why I really appreciate Chanchal and Bhupinder, highlighting that and making it a reason for this session today. And it's kind of brought me back to my roots as well. And there were many, Danu, there were many people around the Dalai Lama who were responsible for keeping him alive. But I think in terms of the responsibility that Mamaji had as a representative of the Indian government, I think that final leg to safety, yes, he played a part there, and was glad to do so.
I mean, taking him through the Dalai Lama through that perilous journey, I mean, through the mountains and through the bad weather, no communication. I mean, obviously, he was greatly responsible for that leg of the journey.
Yes, meeting him in Kameng up at the border. And he only had a little staff, so I think he sent his aide up there because they got the instructions and they were told the Dalai Lama, I think they gave him a code name, the dignitary he was called, is going to come somewhere on the border. You have to meet him. And that was the only information he had. So he had to, decide, using whatever rough intelligence that they could gather from the other side, as to where, was he going to go to Bhutan? At one time, he was also putting out a feeler to Bhutan, the Dalai Lama's office. And, or was he going to come to India? Or was he going to even escape at all? So there was that thing to do. But as they gathered more intelligence, they got a rough idea of where he was coming into. Mamaji was about 8 days away from the border. And to get to the border, you're talking about the top of the mountains, is narrow path along the top of the eastern Himalayas. You can only do it on pony or on foot. No vehicles could go anywhere. And so and he had about 3 or 4 days to do it. So one of his staff, the one who was nearest to the border, he dispatched him to get to the border, and then he raced as hard as he could. And it meant sending messages to villages all along the way, as has been written about in the Indian press when the book came out, that the head of the village had to organize for food and pony exchange. So Mamaji sacrificed his own sleep, but the ponies would not be able to keep going. So every few kilometers, the ponies were changed, and so that Mamaji could get to the border. So I think it was a 7-day journey. He did it in 3 nights, 3 nights and 3 days, along with an assistant, and they eventually reached the border. So that was, and of course, the Dalai Lama had undergone extreme danger, coming all the way from his palace in Lhasa, as has been written about again in the press and by himself. And so he was in a very, very weakened condition. He had very bad dysentery and he could barely stand or walk alone, this young 24-year-old, I think he was. So he wasn't in good shape physically, but mentally he was okay. and he was delighted to meet a representative of the Indian government. And then the party felt that they were safe for the first time in so many weeks. But to answer your question, Thanu, Mamaji was always kind of like an Indian Sean Connery, can I say?
Wow.
Posted to these remote regions, and you know what the Indian kind of dashing army officer type like. I'm sure we've got a fair number linked to the Butwar Bradri, you know, relations of ours. And he was this kind of glamorous, not very talkative figure. And the stories of how he had an involvement in the rescue of the Dalai Lama were going through the family for decades. So it was part of family folklore. There were several postings from an early age. At one stage, he was the Indian government advisor to the King of Sikkim, the Chogyal of Sikkim, when it was a separate kingdom before India annexed it. And I remember going to stay with him there in Gangtok, and it was quite a surreal time. Again, we went to the palace, we had food, we had meals with the royal family there. The prince was playing with us, and that was great fun, learning about Sikkimese, you know, Buddhist culture there. And then he, along the way, he was posted as chief commissioner to the Andaman Islands, which at that time hadn't been opened up to tourists properly, but they were important for India because it was a penal colony. And Kala Pani, it was referred to, you know, people went there to die, like the story of Papillon. And so we went to stay with him one summer, staying in this large wooden ex-British governor's mansion. And I used to see him take the salute every morning from his guards. And again, it was really, really glamorous. And being the chief commissioner, he was like the king of all he surveyed. So we had the run of the place, and we went and stayed on one of his boats. He took us for a tour around the islands. And in fact, in this Home Office room, I've got a table which is imported from the Andaman Islands, which he gifted to my late parents. And when he left the Andaman Islands, I've got a memento that he gave to me, which is from the Gurkha Rifles there. And this is it. And I thought, that I treasure very, very much, that belonged to him. And I've got lots of things belonging to him. I've got a letter from the King of Sikkim on my wall, which was addressed to us because I wrote about my stay in Sikkim. And then he became regional director of the International Labour Organization in Delhi. So even in Delhi, he had a very senior posting. And he was always an influence on me because he spoke very, very little. But when he spoke, it was to the point. So trying to interview him and get information out of him
would have been hard.
Especially emotion. How did it feel, Mamaji? Did you feel that you were in danger? All these kind of questions. It was very, you know, very measured answers. But he gave, in the end, and often he would answer me and say, I know what you're trying to do, Rani. What you're trying to do. But it was my job as the writer of the story to elicit that kind of information from both of these distinguished gentlemen. So I did it to the best of my ability, and the Indian reviews have been very complimentary. I'm very surprised, but very pleased to say.
Your Mamaji sounds like such an amazing man. I'm so much in awe of him, and I think we all feel very proud that he's part of the Potahari Biradri.
Yeah.
And I read about all of this. You know, I've been to Sikkim. I think it's amazing, beautiful. But what you described about your Mamaji and you looking out of the window when he was getting saluted and all, it was like so. I mean, it was so majestic just to think about being part of that. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Really, really proud to have him part of our Biradri. Now,
I think something about the Butwari is all of you are very distinguished, and all of you have fantastic families. Tanu, you're an achiever in yourself. Chanchal,
thank you so much.
has been so.
We all are, all blessed.
Bhupinder ji, and they're doing such great work. I think something about Potwari is, you know, you all, I mean, I'm a Potwari, so I don't consider myself a hyper successful, mega successful like the rest of you, but you're all brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Rani, can we now talk about the most important character, or, you know, the Tibetan God King, also considered a living Buddha of compassion, the Dalai Lama. You have spoken a bit about him, and you have said how you went to his private gardens and everything. But I wanted to ask you, how did you feel? How is his aura when you met him? Because you've been blessed, and so has Bhupinder been blessed, and many people, but many of us have not had a chance to meet him and might not get a chance to meet him. How did you feel when you were in his presence? How is his aura? And can you share some of that experience? How is he to talk to, his personality, something about him?
First of all, I was really surprised at how informal he is. The very first time I met him, he has a sort of you can be introduced to him just outside his official residence, his official quarters, what we call the palace, which is up a hill in Dharamsala. So that was what I wanted to be part of that few people, and obviously it had all been set up, and they could tell that I was a sort of foreigner. And he pointed out to his private secretary, who's also his nephew, who is she? And his nephew explained. So then he came up to me, and to my great surprise, he put his arm around me, and then he always says when he meets me, "I'm Har Mander Singh, like my brother, very fond, very fond." And he sort of gave me a playful tap on the face, like a tap on the cheek, but he's quite strong. And, you know, it was sort of a bit like that. And I thought, wow, the Dalai Lama touched me. And so that it was very informal, and I immediately felt put at ease. And it was very unexpected. He was so tactile. That was the first thing. And I thought, I'm in front of the person who is revered by millions of people, not just Buddhist Tibetans, around the world. And here I am, and he's so informal. And then we went in, and then he started talking to me, and what I noticed was that even his interpreter, he would often look to his interpreter to help him out with certain English words, and I just found him very playful. And before he came in for the interview, there's some curtains at the back of his meeting room, and he pulled the curtains apart like that, and it was like a little sort of magician, almost a magic person, which and so he was just peeping out like that, and to give us a surprise. And you know, it's just not the behavior that one expects of such a person of such standing, you know, friend of Desmond Tutu, friend of leaders throughout the world. And so that was, he just became somebody very playful, but at the same time to be highly respected. But then because I had a job to do, which was to write this book, I really focused on getting the material I needed, because again, I knew it was a one-shot opportunity. I couldn't say, by the way, you know, can I get you to qualify this answer? You just don't do that. And so that was very important. And so I was in professional mode every time I met him. I wasn't relaxed. I'm here to do a job. But then I did, when he came to Runachal in 2017. So I suppose that was a turning point. And I think I know you've got a question about that later on. So I'll wait till we get to that before I talk about that.
That's fine. So obviously, Har Mander Singh ji, your Mama ji, and the Dalai Lama went through such a treacherous journey together. They spent really difficult days together. That would have bonded them for life. So how was their relationship? They would have got a very a close bond and a close friendship? Were they in touch till, you know, your Mamaji is not here with us anymore? Till he was there, were they in constant touch? I mean,
yes, they were, Tanu. Something special did happen in 1959 that none of us were privy to, but I really felt very deeply. And I didn't exploit my uncle's relationship with the Dalai Lama in any way. I got the interviews on my own merit, and they did put me through a lot of hoops before they gave it to me.
Yeah.
But imagine a sick, weakened, physically weakened Dalai Lama with a party of 80, frightened, scared for their lives, arriving at the Indo-Tibetan border in 1959. I think he was 24. My uncle was exactly 10 years older. So also a young officer arriving there with everything organized, interpreters, watching out for assassins, and so on. And as we've written as the journalists and I have written in Indian papers, my uncle was obviously respectful, benign, observing all protocols.
Yeah.
And he was the Dalai Lama's conductor into India. So the Dalai Lama, who's very, very curious, was seeing India and the rest of the world, because it was the first time he was now coming out to settle abroad, in China's neighbor, through the eyes of my uncle and what he decided to show him. So he was constantly asking him questions about education, about things. And then Mamaji had to tread this very careful line between what he could say and being respectful. But that was when they started to form a bond. It was at that point. Mamaji, the Dalai Lama, was always kept on a pony. Mamaji would walk alongside him, or they would both be on pony. And they spent time together almost every day. Mamaji would go and check up on the Dalai Lama's mother, his youngest brother, who was then 13, and the rest of the party. And he gave assurances to the Dalai Lama that they were safe now and that he would look after him. So you can imagine the Dalai Lama and his family looked on Mamaji as a kindly person. And the way they describe him is really interesting to me, because I'm seeing a side of him that even I didn't see before. So, but they became bonded. I know that Dalai Lama, Mamaji told me, and he's written about in his diary, the Dalai Lama asked him this, and then he explained. So in a way, Dalai Lama's learning was through Mamaji. Then you see there's a question of security and safety and the whole physical problems of getting along the eastern Himalayas. The villages, despite everything in the village being at the disposal of the Dalai Lama, it was very, very primitive. You know, no heating, no electricity, no hot running water, definitely not. So all this had to be arranged with very limited resources. Yeah. So, and the Dalai Lama and his party were already very weakened. So to help keep them safe, again, Mamaji arranged airdrops, because you couldn't have food. You didn't get food there naturally enough. So he arranged airdrops by the Air Force onto the top of the mountains. And so the youngest brother, Tenzin Chogyal, who's now, you know, in his 70s, he said it was great fun because sometimes the airdrops missed, and if it was kerosene or fuel, and the thing would explode, and the 13-year-old member of the Dalai Lama's family thought that was great fun.
Yeah.
And things like that. But they spent time together, and then it culminated in when they got to Bomdila. And obviously there's no hotel or anything there. And the most comfortable place was Mamaji's own house, which had a guest house as well, guest part of it. And so for security, it was my Mamiji, Nina, Mamaji's wife, who personally oversaw the cooking every day for security as well. But the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama had his own cook, as has been written about. But Mamiji then oversaw that, and with her own hand would then come and serve the Dalai Lama. So that's where things got very intimate. And Mamaji would go to him every day. And he thought, look, I've got this VIP here for 8 days. I need to entertain him. And obviously there were not multiplexes or anything in primitive Bomdila. So they showed, Mamaji arranged for the Dalai Lama to be shown films about India, about the area, about Nehru, and took him to visit the hospital, the schools, the handicraft emporium, and other places. And so, if you like, that was a sort of introduction to the culture and the history of Kameng or Nifa. So again, the Dalai Lama, you can sort of see how that bonding was happening. And then, of
a lot
course,
of trust, like, obviously between both of them, because obviously Har Mander Singh ji, your Mama ji, did almost quite a lot. I mean, they were like really close. It seems like, food was going from your place and your Mummy ji helped. And it is really intimate. That's really intimate.
Yes,
so
very intimate.
It's lovely. It's so nice.
Obviously, the Dalai Lama's chefs were actually doing the food preparation, but she oversaw everything. And there wasn't any other facility there anyway. And also the Dalai Lama and his party had to trust my uncle. And there were people he was suspicious of, as has been written about when the book came out. And before that Mamaji, anybody he was not sure of or he couldn't account for, he disarmed them and sent them back across the border. And indeed, the Dalai Lama's own security guys and bodyguards, they were disarmed as well. So that it was a very kind of vacuum, sealed unit of people that was around the Dalai Lama, because this was Mamaji's responsibility until the Dalai Lama was handed over into the care of the Prime Minister's representatives.
It's really a beautiful story about many other things, but also a bond of friendship. It's really warm, fuzzy feeling listening to all this. Can we now talk about, I know this is a really important bit. I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about 2017, when the Dalai Lama visited Arunachal Pradesh to retrace his 1959 journey. I mean, as you said, he was only 23 at that time. And especially how you got yourself there, that's another story. So can you share that with us, please, Rani?
You see, I was supposed to do the book quite quickly, but then I kept getting encounters with the Dalai Lama, and any opportunity I could get, I knew it was going to give me more information. And so getting up to Arunachal is no easy task because it is sensitive. But then I heard, and the Dalai Lama has a very strong fondness for Arunachal. Over there, the ethnic people there, ethnic Indians there, are Tibetan Monpas from the Monpa clan. They're very devoted to the Dalai Lama. And Tawang Monastery was the first big monastery he came to that he could take sanctuary at on the Indian side. So he was coming there to do this short tour. And I thought, somehow or other, I've never been to Arunachal. I've never been into the Eastern Himalayas. I have to get myself there. So that again was quite an operation. Apart from anything else, just having alpine gear and working out how to get up into that kind of altitude, how to prepare to get from sea level or above sea level to up into 12, 14,000 feet. That in itself is a treacherous journey, and the quickest way to do it was by helicopter. And one of my friends said, Rani, the best way to get altitude sickness is not to acclimatize, but to go up by helicopter. And because time was short, I didn't have any choice, and I had to take a chopper up from Guwahati. So the first night there in Tawang, was I had altitude sickness, and I got very scared. And also, even now, there's barely much electricity going continuously. You know, there are power outages, and let alone hot water and heating. And it was a cold room I was in. I was alone. And I felt really scared and very, very low at that point. And I was at my wit's end. There was very limited internet connection. And I thought, what's happening here? I don't know what I'm going to do all alone. Have I done the right thing? And then I landed up at one of the offices there, the government offices. And there I saw a wonderful photo from Mamaji's own collection of Mamaji meeting the Dalai Lama at that place. And I thought, wow, it's clear. And everybody had a high respect for him in that area, particularly because they knew him. And so that was very special. And I think that was a turning point for me in terms of when I really felt the Dalai Lama, because it was the first time I'd seen him amongst almost his own people, shall we say. Security and everybody were there. But as well as Indians, there were thousands of Monpas, Sikkimese, Bhutanese, people who traveled there to see him on pilgrimage, walking for days and days through the mountains. And then I was admitted by another friend of the family, another one of his private secretaries, the Delhi representative, and into the VIP area. So that was a very sort of like a royal box, shall we say. And it was from here he was going to address the thousands who'd come and give teachings over 3 days. So I was sitting just a few feet away from him. And so I would meet him, and the security guards would be his bodyguards who pretty much knew my face by that time, would be watching me to see what I was doing. And whenever he came close on his way to his throne, I'd sort of leap out in front on top of my cushion from the floor. And then he'd sort of wallop me across the face in an affectionate greeting. And I'd ask him a question and then watch him. And I think the turning point was seeing all those thousands of Monpas who were listening to him for hours doing his teachings in Tibetan. And then as I looked around the VIP area, I think a turning point for me was when I saw his own personal bodyguards, as I've written about in my book, and they had their eyes closed as he was doing his prayers, and they were actually swaying slightly, and they were doing the prayer, they were mouthing the prayers along with him. And seeing that made me realize and feel the devotion and the commitment of everybody around him. And I think that's what started to make me feel, wow, there is something spiritual here, something important. And my uncle was a devoted Sikh, but I know he had a similar transformative effect on my uncle. And my uncle then referred to Buddhism as his second religion. And that was a turning point for me as well.
Okay, yeah, I think listening to you, I mean, your immense efforts have paid off because you have collected all this detail and your Mamaji's experience and all the historical facts. And I mean, it is such an amazing book that you have come out with. I applaud you for that. Congratulations on that. And I would highly recommend all our viewers to get this book, because once I started reading, I couldn't put it down. You have to know the details. I would obviously, I'm just checking for any questions. We don't seem to have any questions because I think we have covered quite a lot of ground and we have got a lot of information out there. And I wish we had more time, but we will have to conclude our talk here. Talking to you today, Rani, has been immensely insightful, and it would also have definitely increased the viewers' curiosity and intrigue to read the book and discover the details of this perilous and most historic journey of the Dalai Lama into a safe haven in India. So I would recommend everyone to get it. So on behalf of our viewers and the Potahari Baradri Association, I would like to thank you, Rani, for making time for us and taking us on this amazing journey of your book, for giving us a vision and understanding of this most intriguing and enigmatic story of an officer and His Holiness. It has been an honor, Rani. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tanu, and the rest of the Potwar Bradri clan. I have referred to everything I've already said in the Indian press, starting from 2015 to when the book was published in 2020. It's been nice to sort of repeat that and go through it exactly, pretty much word for word. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I look forward to hearing more talks from the Potwar Bradri Association. And thank you for all you're doing for us as a community.
Great. Thank you, Rani ji and Tanu, for being a wonderful host. We will, as you know, we will continue with our series of talks. And so we'll be letting you know about the next talk as soon as we arrange that. Thank you all. Thank you.